He sat at the small oak desk, quill poised over the cream-colored paper, though his hand trembled with a hesitation that betrayed the storm within. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the narrow sash window, casting long, slanting shadows across the room, illuminating the dust motes that floated in silent suspension. Edward's eyes, dark and restless, darted toward the door every few moments, as though expecting a knock that would never come. A letter, carefully sealed and addressed in his neatest hand, lay open before him, a fragile bridge between his heart and the one to whom he could not yet speak. He pressed his lips together, resisting the impulse to write a line he had rehearsed countless times, a confession that, if discovered, might bring ruin to both their families. Outside, the gardens of Ashcombe Manor stirred under a gentle breeze. Roses, their petals faded but still proud, bowed under the weight of dew. Edward could see her now in his mind, standing at the far end of the maze, sunlight catching her hair like strands of gold. Eleanor. The very thought of her name sent a tremor through his chest. Their acquaintance had begun as nothing more than fleeting introductions at social gatherings, yet over the months, brief conversations in corridors and stolen glances in drawing rooms had shaped something far more profound than either dared acknowledge aloud. And now, the mere act of committing words to paper felt like a rebellion against the invisible chains of class and duty that held them apart. He dipped the quill into ink, hesitating as the tip met the surface. Every word was a calculated risk, every sentiment, a dangerous truth. Eleanor's father, Lord Hawthorne, had made it clear that no alliance could ever exist between the heir of Ashcombe Manor and the daughter of a lesser estate. The message of propriety was cruel in its clarity. Hearts were to be guided by station and legacy, not desire. Yet Edward could not help the ache that each refusal, each polite dismissal, carved into him. His hand shook again, and he tore the letter from its folded position, folding it anew as though the motion alone could banish the weight of expectation. Footsteps echoed along the hallway outside. He froze, heart pounding, eyes flicking to the door. A servant paused briefly at the threshold, bowing with respectful discretion. "Forgive me, Master Edward," the young man said, voice soft. "Your carriage is ready for the journey to Broughton. You must leave forthwith, if you are to keep your appointment." Edward exhaled slowly, the tension coiling tighter within him. Today's journey was one dictated by duty, a meeting with a distant cousin whose influence in court might secure his family's future. It was a necessary journey, yet one that would force him farther from the one he wished to see most. Eleanor's presence lingered in his mind, bittersweet and unreachable, like a candle burning at the edge of vision. With trembling fingers, he sealed the letter in its envelope, pressing the wax seal carefully into place. He imagined her hands, small and pale, breaking it open in some distant hour, reading his words with the same quiet longing that had accompanied him through each sleepless night. Yet even as hope whispered, a deeper fear pressed upon him. What if it never reached her? What if duty or circumstance or mischance intervened, rendering his confession meaningless? A sigh escaped him, heavy with the weight of suppressed emotion, and he rose from the desk. The sun had dipped lower, and shadows pooled in the corners of the room like silent witnesses to his torment. Edward retrieved his coat and hat, casting one last glance at the writing desk, at the letter that carried his heart in ink and paper. Each step to the carriage was measured, deliberate, as though pacing could slow the inexorable march of time and distance. As the wheels of the carriage turned onto the winding road, he pressed the envelope to his chest, feeling the solid reality of it against his coat, a talisman of hope amid uncertainty. Eleanor's face appeared again in his mind's eye, serene and distant, and Edward wondered how long longing could endure when faced with the relentless demands of duty, honor, and an unforgiving world. He leaned back against the carriage seat, fingers entwined, and allowed the silence of the countryside to enfold him, carrying his thoughts, and his heart, toward her, over fields and forests, through the veiled constraints of society, toward a destiny yet unwritten. The carriage rolled along the narrow tree-lined lane, the rhythmic clatter of wheels against cobblestones punctuating Edward's restless thoughts. Each turn of the road seemed to draw him farther from Eleanor, yet closer to obligations that felt more like chains than duty. He traced the outline of the sealed letter beneath his coat, imagining her reading it in some quiet corner of Ashcombe Manor, her expression caught between curiosity and yearning. The distance gnawed at him. Every mile was a reminder that love, though fervent, was constrained by circumstance. Hours passed in solemn silence. Edward's mind wandered to the brief encounter earlier that morning. Eleanor, in the sunlit garden, had offered a fleeting smile, one that carried a depth of feeling neither dared name aloud. That small gesture, a simple inclination of the head, had spoken volumes. In that moment, He had felt both the intoxicating promise of connection and the bitter weight of impossibility. Her world and his were not meant to intersect, yet the heart had a defiance all its own. He clenched his hands, pressing them into his lap, a futile attempt to quiet the longing that rose like a tide within him. Upon arrival at Broughton Hall, Edward was met by the austere gaze of his distant cousin, Lord Harrington. Duty demanded cordiality, yet every word he exchanged felt hollow, a performance masking the turmoil beneath. Negotiations, discussions of land and inheritance, were necessary, yet each sentence reminded him of what he had temporarily abandoned. Eleanor's quiet presence, her laughter lingering in the hallways, and the delicate warmth of her hand brushing against his in passing. He excused himself often, claiming to review notes or reflect privately, though in truth he sought any moment to imagine her face, to hear her unspoken thoughts echo in memory. Days stretched onward, and letters from home arrived with increasing urgency. One in particular bore Eleanor's familiar hand, yet its message was brief, tinged with apprehension. Her words spoke of longing, of hope, yet also of the relentless pressure from her father to avoid entanglements that could tarnish their family's reputation. Edward read and reread the lines, feeling the pulse of her restrained desire, each word a testament to both courage and fear. The ink seemed to thrum with her heartbeat, a quiet rebellion against the weight of expectation. He penned a reply, careful, deliberate, each phrase measured, seeking to convey devotion without overstepping propriety. Yet misfortune intervened. A courier, waylaid by rain-swollen roads, delayed the delivery of his letter, leaving Eleanor in uncertainty and Edward unaware of her growing anxiety. The cruel irony struck him with silent force. A gesture of love meant to bridge distance, now became a source of sorrow, its absence widening the chasm between them. Each passing day magnified the ache of separation, and Edward realized that affection alone could not overcome the boundaries imposed by circumstance. In quiet moments, he stared from the windows of Broughton Hall at distant hills, imagining Eleanor wandering her garden, unaware that her heart mirrored his own tumult. The second emotional trial emerged unexpectedly. Lord Hawthorne, informed of Edward's frequent correspondence, summoned his daughter to admonish her for impropriety. Eleanor, poised yet trembling, conveyed her compliance with the father's wishes, yet in her eyes lay a sorrow that neither scolding nor societal expectation could erase. Edward's reply, delayed and undelivered, could not reach her in time. The silence between them became heavier than words. Every unspoken sentiment, every withheld expression, weighed upon their hearts. In the stillness of night, Edward found himself walking the corridors of Broughton Hall, tracing the outlines of shadows, imagining her presence beside him, and understanding the cruel truth of love constrained by duty and social expectation. As weeks passed, Edward resolved to act with discretion and patience. His longing did not abate, but he learned to channel it into small, measured actions, letters crafted with care, moments of reflection and silent devotion. The first trial of separation had deepened his awareness of the fragile balance between desire and obligation, and he understood that the ultimate test of love was not in possession, but in restraint. And yet, despite careful planning and heartfelt effort, a sense of foreboding lingered, for both hearts were tethered across distance by an invisible, unyielding chain. Each day carried the possibility of misfortune, and Edward, though determined, could not entirely dispel the shadow that the unknown cast upon their fragile bond. Weeks turned into months, and the English countryside shifted from the pale greens of spring to the golds and crimsons of autumn. Edward returned to Ashcombe Manor with the first chill of October. The letter he had written so long ago still held safely in his coat, unbroken by time yet heavy with the weight of deferred hope. He approached the garden quietly, stepping along the familiar paths where Eleanor's laughter once echoed, the air tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and fading roses. The manor was hushed, servants moving with discreet purpose, unaware of the private storm in the young man's chest. His heart thudded with anticipation, yet also dread. The cruel lessons of delay had taught him that hope and sorrow often walked hand in hand. Eleanor stood near the hedge maze, a figure of composure amidst the amber light. She turned at the sound of his footsteps and for a moment neither spoke. Their eyes met, and in that silent gaze lay months of yearning, letters unreceived, and 1,000 restrained confessions. She lifted her hands slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture of greeting, and Edward felt a shiver of recognition, not just of her presence, but of the depth of feeling they had managed to sustain despite all obstacles. Yet even in that instant, both were aware of the boundaries that still hemmed them in, the societal walls that would not easily crumble. Edward drew nearer, the letter now pressed between his fingers as though it were a talisman against the fear of rejection or disappointment. "Eleanor," he murmured, voice steady but soft, "I have written to you, so many times. I fear they have not reached you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, a mixture of relief and sorrow, and she shook her head gently. "Some did not," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But your devotion, it has always reached me in spirit." In that exchange, words became unnecessary. The letter's absence mattered little against the permanence of shared longing and understanding. Yet the trials were not ended. Lord Hawthorne's presence loomed like a shadow, a reminder that duty and honor had not yielded to the passions of the heart. Edward's hand brushed hers briefly, restrained and fleeting, a gesture laden with meaning rather than boldness. They knew the constraints, they could not claim the freedoms their hearts desired. But in that quiet communion, they discovered something perhaps more enduring, the possibility of love expressed in patience, in steadfastness, in silent devotion that required no proclamation to prove its worth. As the sun dipped low, painting the manor in hues of rose and amber, Edward finally allowed himself to fold the letter into the hands of Eleanor, not as a plea or a demand but as a testament. She read it slowly, absorbing each carefully chosen phrase, and when she lifted her gaze, there was a quiet understanding between them. Their love would endure, though it could not manifest as society or circumstance might allow. They would treasure it in memory, in small gestures, and in the quiet knowledge that hearts could remain united even when lives were divided. Edward lingered as evening fell, shadows stretching across the garden, wrapping them in a private world of restraint and reflection. He knew that the months ahead might require further patience, that obligations and propriety would continue to dictate their paths. Yet he also knew that love, though constrained, had found a form more resilient than fleeting passion. In the act of waiting, in the sacrifice of desire, they had discovered a depth of devotion that transcended circumstance. Eleanor's eyes met his once more, and in that glance lay acceptance, quiet loss, and the promise of enduring affection. The carriage wheels would soon turn again, duties would call, and the manor would settle into its accustomed rhythms. Yet for Edward and Eleanor, the private world of their hearts remained unbroken, a sanctuary of memory and longing. They parted with a silent nod, each carrying the other in thought, each aware that love could exist without possession, flourish without bold declarations, and endure beyond the cruelty of chance or expectation. In that restrained, tender realization, they discovered the profound truth of devotion, that some loves, though never fully realized, are eternal in their quiet, steadfast presence.